On the morning of Friday, the 24th of July, having learned all the details, Sazonov shouted to his private secretary, "C'est la guerre européenne." This means a European war. Austrian envoy Chapari had gone to the foreign ministry to deliver the note to Sazonov. The Russian minister firmly and categorically rejected two of its provisions. He declared that the Serbs would never agree to the dissolution of the Narodna Odbrana, nor could they permit Austrian representatives to take part in the investigation of the Sarajevo assassination on Serbian soil. Chapari insisted that, in demanding the suppression of terrorist agitation against the dual monarchy, Austria-Hungary was merely acting in concert with all civilized states. But Sazonov gave a sharp reply, "This is wrong. You are setting Europe on fire." The impression which the note will create in Paris, in London, and perhaps elsewhere, is that of an unjustified act of aggression. After this heated exchange, Sazonov pressed the button that would set a vast mechanism in motion. He summoned the Council of Ministers and urgently notified Chief of Staff Yanushkevich and Naval Minister Grigorovich that their presence was required. He also ordered Yanushkevich to make all necessary preparations to place the army on a war footing and to have a plan for partial mobilization ready for discussion by 3 o'clock that afternoon. When Finance Minister Pyotr Bark arrived at the Foreign Ministry for the meeting, he asked Sazonov's secretary whether there was a real chance of war. The reply came bluntly, "Sazonov considers war inevitable." "In that case," said Bark, "urgent steps must be taken to transfer the Russian treasury funds deposited in Berlin banks." He immediately ordered that 100 million rubles be moved to Paris and Petersburg. Before the council convened, Sazonov had already met with military officials to work on mobilization plans. This time, unlike in past crises, Russia would not pull back at the last moment. Seeking reassurance from his allies, Sazonov attended a luncheon with the French ambassador Paleolog and the British ambassador Buchanan. The French were already aligned with the Russians. Days of exchanges and prior intelligence had pointed toward this outcome. The British, however, remained hesitant. Sazonov asked the British envoy whether His Majesty's government intended to declare solidarity with France and Russia. Buchanan replied that he could give no such assurance, and then pressed Sazonov with a blunt question. If Austria-Hungary undertakes military action against Serbia, is Russia proposing to declare war? Sazonov evaded a direct answer, saying that no final decision had yet been taken before the council meeting. But there was no doubt about where he stood. Under his leadership, Russia was preparing in earnest for partial mobilization. Russia cannot remain a passive spectator while a Slavic people is deliberately trampled underfoot. In 1877, we fought Turkey for the liberation of the Balkan Slavs. We made immense sacrifices in pursuit of this goal. If Russia fails to fulfill her historic mission, she will be regarded as a fallen state and henceforth will rank second among the powers. At this critical turning point, if the Serbs are abandoned to their fate, Russian prestige in the Balkans will be utterly destroyed. The dizzying traffic of Petersburg continued at full speed. In the evening, Sazonov met with the Serbian envoy Spalajković. The envoy carried an important instruction from Prime Minister Pasic. He was to inform Sazonov that the Serbian army was in no position to resist an Austro-Hungarian attack and to ask what advice Russia would give Belgrade. Belgrade's stance was clear: the Serbian government would do whatever Russia advised. Sazonov gave the envoy a surprising recommendation. As a gesture of goodwill, he suggested that Serbia announce its acceptance of those provisions deemed less harmful. But he insisted that Belgrade must reject Articles 5 and 6, which violated Serbian sovereignty. In effect, the minister was openly advising the Serbs to allow the Austrians to enter their country without resistance. Yet the crucial details were delivered in private conversation. Sazonov assured the envoy that Serbia could count on Russian support. The message to Belgrade was unmistakable. The Serbs must neither yield nor appear submissive. If matters came to war, Russia would fight at their side. On the 25th of July, the Council of Ministers met under the presidency of Tsar Nicholas. The historic decisions taken that day went even further than those of Friday. The Tsar gave his approval, in principle, for partial mobilization, covering the Black Sea and Baltic fleets, along with 4 military districts: Kiev, Odessa, Moscow, and Kazan. Excluding the navy, a substantial force of 1.1 million men was to be readied for war. Most of the army was still dispersed at summer maneuvers and drills. All units were now ordered back to their permanent barracks, where weapons and supplies were stored. This measure would, beyond the 1.1 million men designated for partial mobilization, bring the empire's entire army rapidly to readiness. On Chief of Staff Yanushkevich's orders, at 4:10 in the afternoon, secret telegram No. 1547 was prepared. Immediately prepare the transport plans and conditions for the return of all units to their permanent barracks. The time allotted for completion of this task is 24 hours. In terms of junior officers and NCOs, the Russian army lagged far behind its German counterpart. As a result, cadets from the military academies were promoted to officer rank at once. In addition, a state of war, meaning martial law, was declared in Moscow, Petersburg, and all fortress cities of European Russia. The Russian war machine had now begun to turn. The expiry of the ultimatum drew ever closer. Signals from Belgrade to Vienna remained ambiguous. On Saturday morning, Pašić had given the impression to foreign embassies that Serbia would comply with the ultimatum, subject only to minor reservations. But this soon proved false. The dissolution of the Narodna Odbrana was flatly rejected, as was the demand for Austrian participation in the investigation. What had changed between morning and evening? The only change was Spalajkovic's report sent from Petersburg to Prime Minister Pašić. Sazonov's full backing, his assurance that the Russian war machine stood entirely behind Serbia, altered Pašić's stance. The consequences were obvious. On Saturday, the 25th of July, at 3 in the afternoon, the Serbian government secretly ordered mobilization against Austria-Hungary. Near 6 o'clock that evening, Prime Minister Pašić went to the Austrian embassy. Handing the note to envoy Baron Giesel, he said, "Some of your demands have been accepted. For the rest, we place our hope in your loyalty and sense of honor as an Austrian officer." Giesel skimmed the reply. At once, he judged that Serbia had failed to comply unconditionally within the 48 hours allotted. Having received the reply at 6 minutes to 6, the envoy crossed the Austro-Serbian border just 45 minutes later. Immediately upon crossing, he telegraphed Vienna with the news. The diplomatic curtain of the dangerous dance had now fallen. In Budapest, Prime Minister Tisza, and in Vienna, Berchtold, received the momentous news before 7 o'clock. Yet despite these decisive steps, Vienna still hesitated. In recent days, Berchtold had sought to calm British opinion by implying that rejection of the ultimatum need not automatically mean war. On Friday, while the ultimatum still ran its course, he had told Russian chargé d'affaires Prince Kudyshev, "The direct consequence of a rejection will be the departure of our minister and the embassy staff." Kudyshev was unconvinced and retorted with a phrase often heard in those days, "Then that means war." Even Conrad, though pressing for speed, framed his orders on Saturday night so that actual mobilization against Serbia would begin only on Tuesday, the 28th of July. Behind this delay lay a lingering hope that Belgrade might yet retreat at the last moment. But Serbia's mobilization had already begun that very Saturday. In any case, Conrad's war plans, Plan B and Plan R, were largely ready, in contrast to Russia's Plan 19. If there was no Russian intervention, only Plan B would be put into effect for the time being. Amid all these events, the British maintained their silence for a long time. The island had troubles of its own. For much of the July crisis, the attention of statesmen in London was fixed on Northern Ireland. The Home Rule Act, passed in May, had caused major controversy. Deprived of a solution that met their demands, both Catholic Irish nationalists and Protestant Unionists had begun preparing for armed struggle. By spring, Ireland stood on the brink of a major conflict. When the Sarajevo incident erupted, the British government's mind was still preoccupied with Ulster. The Franz Ferdinand affair had not even drawn the attention of Prime Minister Asquith. His thoughts were entirely absorbed by the extraordinary things happening in Ulster. For Edward Grey, however, it was different. From the very first moment, he sensed the depth of the crisis. After reading the contents of Austria's note to Belgrade, Grey summoned Austrian ambassador Count Mensdorf on the 24th of July. He acknowledged Austria's concerns over the involvement of certain Serbian officials and admitted that some of the demands in the note were justified. Having secured cabinet approval, Grey proposed that the four powers not directly involved, Britain, France, Italy, and Germany, should intervene if conflict broke out between Russia and Austria. Grey himself had no desire to be drawn into war, nor did public opinion. Almost no major newspaper supported the idea of Britain entering a war. In the final days of the crisis, the Daily News would write of the deep unease at the thought of British soldiers' lives being sacrificed merely so that the Russians might dominate the Slav world. Britain acted as though, a week later, it would not be drawn into the war at all. As the reverberations of the ultimatum echoed across the continent, decision-makers themselves grew uneasy. Despite the rising tension, Wilhelm still believed it was possible to avert a general crisis. When presented with a copy of the ultimatum to Belgrade, he remarked, "It is in fact a rather severe note." Like his entourage, the Kaiser believed Austria would ultimately refrain from war against Serbia. When Admiral Müller suggested that the ultimatum meant war was imminent, the Kaiser contradicted him. Wilhelm was not psychologically prepared for war. At the very hint of conflict, he would fall into panic. On the 27th of July, upon returning from holiday to Berlin, Wilhelm read Serbia's reply to the note. A remarkable result for 48 hours. This is more than we could have expected, but it removes any need for war. He was astonished to hear that, despite this, Austria had declared partial mobilization. In their place, I would never have proclaimed mobilization on that basis, he said. That same morning, at 10 o'clock, the Kaiser sent a letter to Foreign Minister Jago declaring that, since Serbia had yielded to the most humiliating kind of coercion, there was now no need to fight. A deep rift had opened in Germany's decision-making. The Kaiser's views clashed with those of his leading statesmen. While officials pressed Vienna to act quickly, Wilhelm was ready to pull back. The split was so great that the Kaiser's letter to Jago was simply ignored by the minister. The political leadership believed it was no longer possible to change course. Even Bethmann Hollweg warned the Kaiser that there could be no turning back. Yet he presented Wilhelm with a new idea on the 27th of July. He suggested the Kaiser send a telegram to Tsar Nicholas, assuring him that the German government would do everything possible to secure a satisfactory settlement between Vienna and Petersburg. Wilhelm rejected the proposal as ill-timed. Meanwhile, the news from abroad was anything but encouraging. Since the 25th of July, military activity in Russia had risen to an extraordinary level. From the border towns, dozens of reports flooded into Berlin. From the 24th of July onward, London too had entered the fray with threatening language, making it increasingly clear that in the event of war it would stand against Germany. At the German General Staff, an intelligence evaluation board was convened to sift through the information coming in from agents on both sides. On the afternoon of the 28th of July, the board issued its assessment based on the latest reports. It appears that Russia is in partial mobilization. The scope is not yet known. The Odessa and Kiev military districts are certain. Warsaw is not yet confirmed. In other districts, particularly Vilna, mobilization orders have not yet been issued. Still, It is certain that Russia has taken military measures along the German frontier that can be interpreted as preparations for war. Most likely, the period of preparation for war now applies to the entire empire. Frontier guards, fully armed and ready for action, are everywhere. Pens were swiftly giving way to swords. At 11 a.m. on the 28th of July, Austria-Hungary issued the long-expected declaration of war against Serbia. When Chancellor Bethmann Hollweg learned of Austria's action, he once again found himself humiliated by his furious sovereign. On Tuesday afternoon, when Kaiser Wilhelm received the news, he exploded with rage. "You've landed me in quite a mess," he snapped at Bethmann, and ordered him to press Vienna to enter negotiations with Russia, even if, to save the honor of the Austrian army, it required the occupation of Belgrade. Yet the Germans faced an even greater problem. Konrad von Hötzendorf informed Berlin that active military operations against Serbia could not begin until the 12th of August. In other words, Vienna would be unable to launch a major offensive for nearly 2 weeks. Berlin felt it had been played by Vienna. Determined to reshape the character of the coming war, the Kaiser moved quickly. He demanded that Vienna begin talks with St. Petersburg and give Sazonov the clearest possible assurance. "We are far removed from any idea of territorial gain in Serbia, and our military measures are aimed only at temporarily occupying Belgrade and certain other points in Serbian territory in order to compel the Serbian government to meet Austria's demands. Once these demands are met, evacuation will follow." This move, later known as the Halt in Belgrade proposal, revealed a serious division. Kaiser Wilhelm was more inclined toward a compromise. Bethmann Hollweg, however, intended to wait for concessions from St. Petersburg. By demanding concessions from Russia rather than offering them himself, and by avoiding any warning that Germany would respond to Russia's secret mobilization, Bethmann weakened his own leverage. The Kaiser's Halt in Belgrade initiative was not even passed to Vienna until midday on the 28th of July, by which time the first guns had already opened fire, and then only on Bethmann's orders. Meanwhile, London offered to mediate in hopes of lowering tensions and preventing a real war from breaking out. Events, however, were slipping completely out of control. After all these developments, the Kaiser accepted, within just 24 hours, the very plan of telegraphic diplomacy he had rejected on the 27th of July when first proposed by the Chancellor. Nor was this panic confined to Berlin. In St. Petersburg, Tsar Nicholas likewise dictated a telegram to the Kaiser, hoping to defuse the crisis. Both monarchs, frightened once the possibility of real war loomed before them, were now attempting to retreat after weeks of threatening to press the button, and even after pressing it. As the first shots echoed, these two rulers, who had threatened each other with war now, busied themselves drafting telegrams. "I'm glad you are back. In this serious moment, I appeal to you to help me. An ignoble war has been declared to a weak country. The indignation in Russia shared fully by me is enormous. I foresee that very soon I shall be overwhelmed by the pressure forced upon me and be forced to take extreme measures which will lead to war, to try and avoid such a calamity as a European war. I beg you, in the name of our old friendship, to do what you can to stop your allies from going too far." I have heard with the deepest concern of the impression produced in your country by Austria's action against Serbia. The unscrupulous agitation that has been going on in Serbia for years has led to the frightful crime of which Archduke Franz Ferdinand has been the victim. The spirit that led to the murder of one's own king and queen still dominates this country. In this case, politics plays no part. On the other hand, I fully understand how difficult it is for you and your government to face public opinion. I confidently hope you will help me to smooth over difficulties that may yet arise. Your very sincere and devoted friend and cousin, Willy. Thanks for your telegram, conciliatory and friendly. Whereas official message presented today by your ambassador to my minister was conveyed in a very different tone. Beg you to explain this divergency. It would be right to give over the Austro-Serbian problem to the Hague Conference. Best thanks for telegram. It is quite out of the question that my ambassador's language could have been in contradiction with the tenor of my telegram. Count Portales was instructed to draw the attention of your government to the danger and grave consequences involved by a mobilization. Russia mobilizes against Austria, my role as mediator you kindly entrusted me with, and which I accepted at your express prayer, will be endangered if not ruined. The whole weight of the decision lies solely on your shoulders now, who have to bear the responsibility for peace or war. I thank you heartily for your mediation, which begins to give one hope that all may yet end peacefully. It is technically impossible to stop our military preparations, which were obligatory owing to Austria's mobilization. We are far from wishing war. As long as the negotiations with Austria on Serbia's account are taking place, my troops shall not make any provocative action. I give you my solemn word for this. I put all my trust in God's mercy and hope in your successful mediation in Vienna for the welfare of our countries and for the peace of Europe. I yesterday pointed out to your government the way by which a lone war may be avoided. Although I requested an answer for noon today, no telegram from my ambassador conveying an answer from your government has reached me as yet. I therefore have been obliged to mobilize my army. Immediate, affirmative, clear and unmistakable answer from your government is the only way to avoid endless misery. Until I've received this answer, alas, I am unable to discuss the subject of your telegram. As a matter of fact, I must request you to immediately order your troops on no account to commit the slightest act of trespassing over our frontiers. They clearly felt the heavy burden of responsibility for unleashing a war that would certainly lead to the deaths of thousands, perhaps millions, of their subjects. With the spectre of such a conflict looming ever larger, Willy and Nicky clutched desperately at any possible escape. If their practical authority as monarchs had been as absolute as it appeared on paper, they might have succeeded. But they could not. They lacked the power. After Austria's declaration of war on Serbia, and buoyed by Paleolog's assurance of France's unconditional support, Sazonov pushed Russia's war preparations ahead with determination. Even as Wilhelm and Nicholas exchanged their peace telegrams, Russia had already entered the countdown to a European war. The Austrian noose around Germany's neck was now fully drawn tight. The war they had tried to avert began with the first shots fired at 1 a.m. on the 29th of July. In response to Serbian engineers blowing up the railway bridge across the River Sava that linked the two countries, the Austro-Hungarian monitor SMS Bodrog opened fire on Belgrade. The war that would later be called World War I had begun.